Since your father isn't here, she said to him, Daniel, I'm scared to sleep alone in my room. Would it be okay if I stayed here? She asked with determination. Unable to refuse his stepmom's firm request, Daniel reluctantly agreed. She lay beside him, her hand resting on his chest in a gentle caress. Slowly, her hand began to move downward. Daniel, a 9-year-old boy, lived with his father, Mr. Jonathan, and his stepmother, Mrs. Grace. His parents had divorced when he was very young, and although he loved his mom, he rarely got to see her. Daniel adored his father, but always felt uneasy around his stepmother. While she was polite and often kind, some of her actions left him confused and unsettled. One evening, as the sun set and the house grew quiet, Daniel was taking a bath when Mrs. Grace walked in unexpectedly. Let me help you wash your back, she said with a warm smile. Daniel hesitated. He wasn't sure how to respond, so he said nothing. Mrs. Grace began washing his back with slow, deliberate strokes. At first, Daniel remained still, uncertain how to react, but as her hands moved to his hair and then down to other parts of his body, his discomfort grew. His breath hitched, and he felt a knot tightening in his stomach. He thought about telling her to stop, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he tried inching away, only to have her gently but firmly hold him in place. Just relax, Daniel, she whispered, her tone soft but insistent. I'm only trying to help you. Daniel felt uncomfortable. He thought he was old enough to handle bathing himself, but he kept silent. The next day, Mr. Jonathan took Daniel shopping for new clothes. Daniel picked out a bright, colorful shirt and a pair of trendy sneakers. He was excited to wear them, but when they returned home, his stepmom's behavior puzzled him even more. She picked up the new shirt and slipped it on. This shirt looks so nice, she said, admiring herself in the mirror. It fits me perfectly. Daniel didn't understand why she was wearing his new shirt, but he didn't say anything. That night, as he lay in bed, he couldn't stop thinking about his stepmom's behavior. Why was she bathing him? Why was she wearing his clothes? He wanted to talk to his dad, but didn't know how to bring it up. For the next few days, Daniel tried to talk to his father, but Mr. Jonathan always seemed too busy. Daniel felt alone and unsure of what to do. All the boundaries were crossed one day when Mr. Jonathan spent a few days out of town on business trip. Daniel felt out of the ordinary when his stepmother greeted him with a broad smile upon his return from school, so he returned the smile with power. Daniel started coughing after a while at the dining table. When his stepmother saw it, she asked, Daniel, are you okay? What's wrong? Daniel then answered, It's just a dry throat, nothing more. I'm fine, she said with a firm smile. We shouldn't treat this as a minor issue because it could be a lung infection and could cause a serious problem later, she said. Daniel gave a head nod. After finishing his supper, he retired to his room. He heard his room door pounding at night when he was asleep. She said, May I come in, Daniel? His stepmother was there, and she had something in her hand. She entered and took a seat on the bed next to Daniel. She inquired, How is your cough? Now it's much better, Daniel answered. It will help with your cough, Daniel. Let me apply it, she offered, taking a lotion from her palm. Daniel reluctantly complied. He had no choice but to listen to his stepmother. Daniel felt some relief from the lotion as she began to apply it to his throat and then slowly moved down to his chest. However, stepmom continued to massage his chest as she was having fun. Since your father isn't here, she said to him, Daniel, I'm scared to sleep alone in my room. Would it be okay if I stayed here? She asked with determination. Unable to refuse her firm request, Daniel reluctantly agreed. She lay beside him, her hand resting on his chest in a gentle caress. Slowly, her hand began to move downward. After a moment, she took his hand and guided it across her body, insisting he touch her. Though Daniel compiled at first, unease started to creep in, and concern began to cloud his thoughts. He lacked the bravery to stop her. At last, she placed her hands on his trousers and began to make odd sounds. She starts to move her hands aggressively. Since it was hurting him, Daniel began pleading with her to stop. Stepmom, please stop. It's hurting me. However, she was not in the mood to hear his entreaties. After a few minutes, she finally let out a sigh of satisfaction, and her hand movements ceased as her weird noises grew louder and louder. The whole night, Daniel held back his tears and stared at the ceiling and decided he couldn't keep his feelings bottled up anymore. If he couldn't talk to his dad, he needed to find someone else he trusted. At school the next day, during recess, Daniel sat alone on a bench, watching the other kids play. He felt nervous. What if no one believed him? What if his dad got angry? Then he spotted his favorite teacher, Miss Anita, sitting under a tree with her notebook. Miss Anita was known for her warm smile and gentle nature. She often stayed after class to help struggling students or listen to their concerns. Daniel especially remembered how she had once helped him with a tough math problem, patiently guiding him step by step until he understood. Her calm and understanding demeanor made her a trusted figure in his life, someone he knew he could rely on when things felt overwhelming. Taking a deep breath, Daniel approached her. "Miss Anita," he said quietly, his voice trembling. She looked up and smiled. "Hello, Daniel. You look worried. What's wrong?" He hesitated, twisting his fingers nervously. I need to talk to you. It's about my stepmom. She's been acting strange." Miss Anita put her notebook aside and motioned for him to sit down. "What do you mean by strange? Tell me what's going on," she said gently. Daniel looked around to make sure no one was listening, then explained everything: the bath, the shirt, and how it made him feel uncomfortable. Miss Anita's expression grew serious as she listened carefully. "Daniel, I'm so glad you told me this," she said. "It's important that you feel safe and comfortable at home. I'm going to help you, okay?" Daniel nodded, feeling both scared and relieved. At least now, he wasn't carrying the burden alone. That afternoon, Miss Anita called Mr. Jonathan to share what Daniel had told her. She spoke gently but firmly, explaining the importance of addressing the situation. Mr. Jonathan was silent for a moment before letting out a heavy sigh. "I didn't know Daniel felt this way," he admitted. "I thought everything was fine. Sometimes children don't share how they feel until it becomes too much," Miss Anita replied. "But this is serious. You need to make sure Daniel feels safe and understood." Mr. Jonathan agreed to talk to Mrs. Grace that evening. Miss Anita also suggested involving a counselor or family friend to help address the situation appropriately. That evening, Daniel sat in his room, pretending to read a book. He could hear voices from the living room. His father's voice, low and serious, and stepmom's voice, defensive and high-pitched. "I was just trying to help him," she said. "I thought I was being a good stepmother." "You crossed a line," Mr. Jonathan replied firmly. Daniel was uncomfortable, and that's not okay. "You should have known better." There was a long silence, followed by a heavy sigh from Mrs. Grace. In his room, Daniel felt a mix of guilt and relief. Was it wrong for him to have spoken up? Did he do the right thing? The next day, Mr. Jonathan sat Daniel down for a talk. "Daniel, I'm so sorry I haven't been paying enough attention to you," he said. "I didn't realize you were feeling this way. From now on, I promise to listen to you and make sure you're comfortable." Daniel nodded, feeling emotional. "What about stepmom?" he asked hesitantly. "She's agreed to give you more space," his dad said. "We're also going to talk to someone who can help us understand each other better as a family. But I need you to promise me something too. If anything ever makes you feel uncomfortable again, you have to tell me right away. Can you do that?" "I promise," Daniel said. Over the next few weeks, things began to change. Stepmom apologized to Daniel, admitting she hadn't realized her actions made him uncomfortable. She started attending counseling sessions to learn more about setting boundaries. Mr. Jonathan also made an effort to spend more time with Daniel, asking about his day and making sure he felt heard. Even so, Daniel remained cautious. He couldn't forget how strange and unsettling those moments had been. He kept a close eye on stepmom, always alert for signs that things might go back to how they were. Daniel realized that speaking up had been the right thing to do. It wasn't easy, but he learned that it was okay to feel uneasy and that telling someone he trusted could make all the difference. The road to healing and fixing things was long, but he had taken the first step toward feeling safe and happy in his home again. One night, as Daniel lay in bed, he heard soft footsteps outside his door. His heart began to race. He froze, holding his breath, as the doorknob slowly turned. "Daniel?" Stepmom's voice called softly from the hallway. "Are you awake?" Daniel didn't answer. He squeezed his eyes shut and pretended to be asleep. After a long pause, the door clicked shut, and the footsteps retreated. Hey everyone, if you enjoyed this story and want to see what happens next, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support keeps us going and helps bring more stories to life. And we've got a surprise for you. If you want to see part 2, just drop a comment saying part 2 below. If we get enough comments, we'll upload the next chapter soon. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.